The four most dangerous words in political history might just be, "It can't happen here." That
Yeah.
one phrase is delivered with this mix of, I don't know, national pride and maybe sheer political apathy. It's the core of the great American
A
illusion.
complacent belief, yeah. The worst of human nature, tyranny, fascism, the kind of collapse that just sweeps away freedoms, that's always a foreign problem.
Right. We, the exceptional democracy, we're immune.
And that very complacency, that self-congratulation that Lewis saw everywhere in the mid-1930s, that was the target he wanted to incinerate with his 1935 novel, It Can't Happen Here.
Sinclair Lewis, we're talking about a Pulitzer Nobel-winning novelist here. He saw the writing on the wall in Europe, and he felt this immense urgency to bring that warning home, right onto American soil.
Absolutely. This wasn't just him writing another book. This was an urgent, almost blistering warning to the American public.
And that's our mission today. We're going to deep dive into the rhetorical strategies, the arguments, the tone, the emotional appeals that Lewis used to turn this vague European threat into a horrifyingly plausible domestic nightmare.
We really want to show you how he built a blueprint for the fragility of democracy using, well, just fiction.
To do that, you really have to feel the political heat of 1935,
Yeah.
what we call the exigence.
Right. Hitler was solidifying his power. Mussolini was on the march. Charismatic authoritarians were everywhere.
And yet, in the U.S., the mood was just dismissive. It was, we have a constitution, we're stable, we're too smart for that.
So Lewis wrote this book as a direct, almost panicked response to that denial.
That denial is the central problem he had to solve.
Yeah.
And for you to get the most out of this critique, we should just note, you're experiencing a unique two-host AI conversation powered by Google's Notebook LM for deeper, more dynamic book analysis.
Okay, so let's jump right into the core subject. This is where Lewis, I think, first establishes his credibility.
The story itself.
The story itself, the rise of this populist, Berzelius, Buzz Windrip to dictatorial power, and then the systematic step-by-step collapse of American society.
He didn't imagine an invasion. He imagined an American politician winning an American election and then just dismantling the system from the inside.
And this is where the logic of his argument, the logos, becomes so chilling. Lewis understood the threat doesn't show up like a revolution.
No, it's a series of small, plausible steps. It's dominoes falling, one after another.
Exactly. The logos of the book starts with that populist rhetoric, promising simple solutions to complex problems.
Then it moves really quickly to silencing dissent, but always under the guise of restoring order or patriotism.
And then it's over. The erosion of democratic norms, personal freedoms, they're just gone.
What Lewis does so brilliantly is he makes Windrip feel so American.
Yes, he's not some European fascist in a foreign uniform. He's a folksy, bombastic guy, a former newspaper editor, a senator.
He has this venomous but still accessible public persona. It's all simple rhetoric aimed right at people's economic fears and political frustrations.
He's the savior from the corrupt elites, and that makes the whole political dissent feel organic to the American landscape. It doesn't feel imported.
So how did he make that so plausible? It wasn't just the rhetoric.
No, not at all. The text shows he meticulously detailed the institutional breakdown. Windrip gets elected, sure, but the real change starts when he creates his own paramilitary, the Minutemen.
And they aren't framed as stormtroopers.
Of course not. They're protectors of American values, and they very quickly replace the National Guard, federal authority, everything.
That's the crucial detail, isn't it? The logic of the collapse. He shows how existing institutions, the press, the courts, even the idea of truth itself, are just corroded from within.
The Supreme Court gets packed. Dissenting voices aren't just jailed. They're labeled enemies of the real America.
By presenting the power grab this way, as a series of sort of legal or semi-legal patriotic actions, Lewis was arguing that apathy was the real lubricant of tyranny.
And his intended audience was key here. He wasn't trying to convince the extremists.
No, he was targeting the rest of us. He juxtaposes that ingrained American pride, that feeling of exceptionalism, with our deep vulnerability to this kind of demagoguery.
He was aiming squarely at the people who took democracy for granted, forcing them to actually visualize it unraveling.
Which brings up the constraint he was working under. I mean, it's the 1930s.
Huge constraint. He had to signal his critique of authoritarianism on the far right, but also hint at concerns with the far left, all without alienating his readers or getting blacklisted.
And he used the structure of dystopian fiction to get around that.
He did. The events themselves became the critique. He gave us Windrip, who was sort of an amalgamation of real populist figures.
Like Huey Long, maybe?
People certainly saw that. It let him comment on real figures without naming them, so he could avoid a direct political fight but still deliver the punch.
Okay, so if we move from the logic, the logos, to the feeling of the book, the tone, and the pathos, this is where I think it becomes truly great.
I agree. He deliberately blends these contrasting tones. On one hand, you have this broad, almost farcical satire aimed at Windrip and the absurdity of his movement.
He's mocking the strongman archetype.
Yes, but that contrasts so sharply with the language he uses when he's describing the atrocities that follow.
The tone just shifts completely. It becomes direct, factual, almost understated. When he describes the concentration camps or the loss of freedom, there's no hyperbole.
It reads like a sober, almost journalistic report. And this puts the banality of this new evil right up against the frantic, misguided faith of the "it can't happen here" crowd.
That blending is brilliant. It gives the whole thing so much credibility and gravity. You can laugh at the populist buffoonery 1 minute.
And then feel the absolute crushing reality of state power the next. It's a very sophisticated emotional manipulation. It's not just to scare you, it's to anchor that fear in something that feels real.
Which brings us to the emotional core of the book. The pathos generated through the protagonist, Doremus Jessup.
Ah, Jessup. He's the quintessential white liberal, right? Skeptical, small-town newspaper editor.
And his emotional journey is everything. It's fear, despair, and most powerfully, it's regret.
Lewis uses Jessup to embody the reader's own potential complacency. In the beginning, Jessup just intellectualizes the danger. He dismisses Windrip as a buffoon who's going to fail on his own.
He fails to act. Fails to believe the threat is real until it's much, much too late.
And the emotional appeal is centered right there, in Jessup's gut-wrenching realization that he should have used his voice sooner, that his intellectual detachment actually enabled the disaster.
Seeing this ordinary smart man fall into complicity, and then victimhood, he's eventually imprisoned and tortured, that's what raises the emotional stakes for you as the reader.
You feel his guilt, you feel those missed chances, and that chilling thought that maybe you too might just stand by and watch.
It's basically an instruction manual for political self-recrimination.
And this whole journey into the heart of the story, it all relies on Lewis's credibility, his ethos.
Right. He was leveraging his reputation. I mean, he was already seen as the greatest chronicler and satirist of American small-town life. He wasn't some outsider.
He was one of the most famous Americans writing about Americans. His authority was built on a deep, deep understanding of the society.
He crafted characters whose reactions to tyranny, denial, fear, their flawed attempts at resistance were just completely relatable.
And his credibility makes the whole unbelievable premise believable.
That relatability is so essential for the kind of reflection we need to challenge our own assumptions. You might even find yourself analyzing Lewis's choices as deeply as we are right now.
For more analysis that promotes this kind of critical thought, you can see Mindful Moments, our YouTube channel offering AI book analysis, summaries, and critiques. It's all about inspiring reflection and rational thought.
So, building on that, Lewis's fundamental achievement was really proving that authoritarianism isn't some foreign, exotic idea.
He used the medium of dystopian fiction, which has a narrative structure designed to immerse you, the casual reader, and deliver a visceral political message.
He dramatized the warning that the true threat is, and always has been, internal.
It's the sheer plausibility of it all, the characters, the events. That's what made it so effective. Lewis's genius was fusing real historical fears, the rise of European strongmen, with the familiar, folksy rhetoric of American populism.
Which made the danger feel immediate, personal.
And the book's reception really reflected that. The sources note that his sober, almost factual reporting of events, plus a cast of characters who reacted in realistic ways.
It let a wide range of Americans see themselves in the disaster. It was accessible in a way a dense political treatise just never could be.
Though we should acknowledge a critical reflection some later commentators have offered.
That its focus is pretty narrow.
That tends to focus on white liberal anxieties, yeah. It's all centered around an educated man like Jessup, and that perspective might limit the full scope of the American experience in a crisis like this.
That's a fair critique, even though the overall message resonated very broadly.
Still, the political achievement is profound. Lewis showed, in dramatic terms, that institutions don't just fail overnight, they collapse step by step.
And they're normalized by people who just refuse to believe the unbelievable. His fictional evidence was so meticulously grounded in the real political rhetoric of his time.
That meticulous grounding, showing how internal threats like political apathy, self-interest, and that comfortable refusal to believe it can't happen here were so much more dangerous than any external enemy. That is the book's true, enduring power.
It was a terrifying mirror for a democracy that was maybe a little too complacent for its own good.
And for deeper exploration of these topics, you can examine how Lewis's fictional world connects to real historical moments. Be sure to check out Mindful Moments and our podcasts.
And this leaves us with a final, provocative thought for you to mull over.
If Lewis's ultimate warning was against political apathy and refusing to believe it can't happen here in the 1930s, what complacent belief are we holding on to today?
What sacred norm do we take for granted that might be undermining stability, threatening the system from within right now?
Click the link on screen for the in-depth book summary. Subscribe, share, purchase via link, and think critically.